Good afternoon, and welcome to the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. And this is my show about mental health, about recovering from mental breakdowns and trouble with mental health in general. My personal experiences, which have been long and bloody torturous, I can assure you, and many other people that I've come across over the years, spoken to, lived with, and seen what they have to go through with various other types of mental disorders, and it's a major problem in our country. And along with mental health problems, unfortunately, invariably goes things like alcoholism, drugs, suicide. They are all tied up in this mental health issue. So it has a lot of ramifications when people are mentally unwell. People who are not happy, people who are broken, people who are suffering with pain, often do tend to steer themselves towards alcohol and drugs, and often overindulge, sometimes become addicted, and that only leads to worse mental health problems. And we are facing a decision this year when the elections roll around about decriminalisation of marijuana. Now, there was apparently a big bust in Stokes Valley in Upper Hutt the other day, and the police went round and pulled out all this weed out of people's backyards. Now, I don't indulge in things like that, and the good reason for it is I don't really agree with that. And people think that my thoughts on things like marijuana are quite radical. I assure you they are not. People like Helen Clark are decades ahead of me in their thinking. I don't consider myself a conservative person, but my concern is with very young people accessing drugs that are very powerful, and with a developing brain, I do not encourage things like the consumption even of marijuana, not in a young teenager with a developing mind and body. It's not a good thing to get into. So I am not really very keen on people growing weed in their backyards where their kids can get hold of it. I don't agree with those sort of things at all. What I would really like to see is government regulation. As far as I am concerned, if we're going to go down the road of decriminalising marijuana, and I am for that, but what I would like to see is the government regulating it, growing it under licence, scientists doing their job, so it's not too strong, it's not poisonous, they can regulate supply, strength, and it can only be purchased in outlets where proof of age, ID, is an absolute requirement. No underage people should have access to this, and I guess it's up to all of New Zealand to set what age limit that might be, whether it be 16, 18 or 21. I have my own personal opinions on that. That's my personal opinions. I'm sure you've got your own. But to me, this is the way to go. And not just because it makes it safe and keeps our kids safe, and so they don't develop mental problems very early in their lives. They can be more stable for a longer period of time and come to terms with themselves and their world around them. So, I do not agree with young people having access to alcohol or marijuana, and especially not pee. That stuff really frightens me. And the reason for that is because I got involved in drugs and alcohol very, very young in my life, and, it did hold me back, definitely. It made me a different person, and it didn't make me any less intelligent, I can guarantee you that. The crazy prejudices that are out there, the bias and the slight, a lot of it is exaggeration, misunderstanding, people who really don't know what they're talking about, trumpet on about stupid things like, what do they call it, a gateway drug and stuff like that. Honestly, if someone smokes cigarettes, they're not going to start jacking up heroin. It doesn't happen like that. It really doesn't. But as far as I'm concerned, we need to protect all people from the really serious, nasty drugs like cocaine and heroin and P. I mean, we just cannot tolerate those things because of the damage that they do to people. I've seen people in terrible, terrible states, their lives destroyed by things like that, and I really want it gone. I'm all good with people smoking marijuana at cafes as long as it's done under control, and most importantly of all, I guess, is that it will raise a hell of a lot of tax. It will pay for a lot of hospitals, and people can be protected, young people. I mean, they don't need to get into drugs and stuff when they're young. They need to get into the outdoors, the good side of Aotearoa, the fishing and the tramping and, if we could encourage kids to get into that, and I realise this, the internet and smartphones and all that, and it's all good, but I'd like to see a better balance where kids, can grow up without a world of violence and drugs and mental issues and just, get them enjoying life a bit more before they start indulging in wicked things like that. Right, well, that's my little spiel on marijuana and drugs, and I hope it gives people food for thought. You see, I'm not one of these, give it to them, skin up some marlies, everyone rock on and we'll grow weed in the backyard. I'm not that way inclined. I think that the trouble is, the more freely something is available, the more likelihood the youth is to indulge in something that they really don't have the life experience, the mental control. I mean, they need to grow up a little bit before they start getting wasted, and I don't know how many kids you've seen wasted, but, I've back in the day, down Courtney Place, there would be kids upside down and rubbish bins spewing all over the place, fights breaking out, people going to hospital, lots of violence, lots of excess. This is back in the days of drink yourself for bliss. Alcohol was the drug in the day, but then marijuana sort of became more and more prevalent with Mr. Asia and various things since then. And now, it just seems to be escalating to the point where we're getting really dangerous drugs like P that are very easily available. And, I really wish that the police would clamp down on that, because it strikes me that by taking all of this marijuana out of circulation, P is going to be the more accessible drug, and there is a chance that people are going to turn that way, and I pray to God it doesn't happen. But, I think we've got to do this sensibly, and like I say, I think government regulation is definitely the way to go. And the other thing is that it brings the prices down, it takes the money and the power away from the gangs, it makes everything safer for everybody. And like I say, you make money out of tax. It pays for things that we need, like hospitals. So it's a win for everybody if we do it that way. And I know that may sound, people will be sitting there thinking, what is he saying? But honestly, I think it's a good way to go, and everybody wins. Just saying to everybody, grow fields of weed, I don't really see that as a solution. That's just the easy way out, which is what we tend to do. But if we do it properly, then everyone can be safe and everybody wins. Right, we've got to crack on with my story today, so I hope you enjoyed this one. This is one of my little adventures in Africa. This one brings back some good memories. It's called the Kalahari and Chobe River. 4 of us struck out north from Pretoria, South Africa. We headed for the thirsty land of the Kalahari. Seedy, Wayne, Dave and myself had bought a car in Johannesburg and were driving up to the Chobe River on the far side of the Kalahari Desert. We planned to drive the length of the Kalahari to one of the 3 great river systems to the north. Our aim was the Chobe National Game Park in Botswana. Our first day's drive from Pretoria was a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. At first, there was the reassurance of farms and horticulture made possible with irrigation. South Africa for all of its shortcomings, still had well-organised systems in place, which made life possible in tremendous heat. When the Dutch first crossed this place, they named them the Thirsty Lands. Driving over the border from South Africa to southern Botswana was like day to night. Suddenly the desert proper began looking reminiscent of the Australian outback. A large straight motorway led us into sandy, rather barren land that had not seen rain or any kind of water for a very long time. Occasionally the motorway opened out and doubled as a landing strip for planes. There was very little game around as a result of little foliage. The little we saw in our travels looked half-starved. We planned to spend as little time as possible in the southern parched lands and head for the promise the northern rivers provided. There are three great river systems in the north. The Okavango, which starts life in the Angolan heights and floods erratically through northern Botswana. Secondly, the Kuando River starts in Namibia and again erratically floods marshlands until it becomes the Chobe River system in Botswana. The Chobe then meets the mighty Zambezi, which flows down from Zambia, and they become the amazing Victoria Falls at the Zambia-Zimbabwe border. We were heading to the Middle River system, where it turns into the Chobe River in a well-established national park. It boasts some of the greatest concentrations of game anywhere in Africa. The water and grasslands attract hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, of wildebeest and zebra, along with gazelles, kudu and impala and giraffe and so on. In turn, they attract lions, leopards, cheetahs and hyena. Most impressive of all, however, are the tens of thousands of elephants this good grazing attracts. But before we reached the grassy north, we had to battle through the parched south. We pulled into a small town in the middle of nowhere after trying a shortcut which resulted in some damage to the car. While refuelling and getting repairs done, we stopped for a Coke and were mobbed by about 100 local kids. We were told most of them have never even seen a white man, and they delighted in pinching the hair on our arms to make sure that we were real. The children were full of life and very clean considering the lack of water. But we had to push on hard north, driving from dawn till after dark, and managed to spend only a few nights in the desert, camping where and when we had to. After stopping in another nowhere town, Seedy decided to rattle off a few photographs. Unfortunately, he accidentally photographed mud huts surrounded by razor wire with a sign saying military installation on it. Before long, a jeep turned up on the scene, and at first the boys in the back holding AK-47s were all smiles for the camera. Suddenly, however, their sergeant took exception to what we were doing and angrily demanded to see our film. Smiles suddenly turned into frowns, and suddenly we were facing 4 loaded AK-47s. At first, Seedy tried to argue with the sergeant, but as things escalated, changed his mind and handed over the camera. The ignorant sergeant then exposed the film to the sunlight, then rolled it up and took our details, promising to return our films once checked. This at least diffused the scary situation, and the privates shouldered their weapons. Life is cheap in Africa, and I truly feared for our lives for a few minutes. We couldn't get out of that town fast enough, and it was good to get back on the road up north. After a few more days of motoring through the desert, we finally started to see some green trees and an increased amount of scrub and life. Then one day, I came round the corner, and all of a sudden 3 elephants were wandering across the motorway, blocking our way. For a few seconds I was too stunned to do anything as these massive animals ambled along. This was our first introduction to the Chobe area, and stunned us to see these great creatures wandering free in the open. Before long we reached the game park proper and were surprised to see how little infrastructure there was to the place. There were a few safari-style places set up, but other than that, no real camps as such. We simply paid to enter and were free to set up camp anywhere we could. Upon entering the game park, we were blown away by the incredible amounts of life everywhere. Hundreds of species of birds, zebra and wildebeest in their countless thousands, antelope and gazelle, the huge impala and the oppressive kudu with its corkscrew horns, all of them in massive numbers. Many other game like giraffes and hippos were also common along the river. But most impressive of all was the vast amounts of elephants wandering freely. All of these animals in turn attracted huge numbers of predators like lions, cheetahs and leopards. On our first day in the Chobe National Game Park, we met up with some hunters who told us they were culling elephants. The numbers were too great to sustain and they were devastating the bush habitat. They were culling whole family units at a time so as to cause as little disruption as possible. We found it hard to believe that such wholesale slaughter was necessary, though their explanation was compelling. On the river itself we saw elephants to the red horizon. Nothing could have prepared us for that magnificent sight. As the sun slowly lowered red to the horizon, the elephants came down to bathe. Even the grumpy hippo were forced to give up the best parts of the river. The elephants truly revel joyously in this time. They play with their young, free in their great numbers from any predator. Instead, the lions lie hidden in the long grasses, waiting patiently for an opportunity of easier prey. Life on the river runs like clockwork, and each animal that needs water has its turn. On our first day on the Chobe River, we caught the last half of the day. We found a flat patch of grass at around lunchtime. We were immediately robbed of biscuits by monkeys when we stopped for a feed. Dozens of baboons descended on the scene after the monkeys, and we quickly learned to leave nothing for the robbers to have. The male baboons were particularly large and intimidating, with huge fangs and showing little fear of man. The best way to spot game was from the relative safety of the car. So after setting up our tents, we set off on the unsealed, sandy, bumpy roads. I was a designated driver by now and the roads were sorely testing. I quickly learned the most dangerous time was driving through a family group of elephants. The young ones, ranging from 1 to 2 tonne, would suddenly charge head first towards us. These mock charges were truly frightening, and the only way to stop them is to plant boot and charge straight at them. The dust and the roar of the engine puts them off, but I had to be careful not to hit them, as 4-tonne Mum was always looking on. Large bull elephants, however, must be avoided at all costs. They are short-tempered, huge, and run surprisingly quickly. We watched them bulldoze whole trees down and strip them of all the leaves. The amount of devastation they caused was unbelievable. After spending the afternoon game spotting, we returned to camp to cook tea. As we cooked up what we had on the riverside camp, a family of warthogs came trotting past us and into their burrows on the riverbed. The water flowed quickly at this point, so there were no crocodiles about. All the same, I felt very vulnerable in our makeshift camp. I didn't sleep at all well, and at about 2 a.m. something came sniffing at my head. With only a millimetre of plastic between us, I was frozen with fear. The creature then moved off, and I fell into a whiskey-induced sleep. I woke up at the dawn chorus of birds and general wildlife. I poked my head out of the tent to watch our warthog neighbours trot past on their way out. The 4 of us headed out after breakfast. We spent all day driving around game spotting, and before long Dave spotted a lioness in the long grass. I stopped and hopped out for a better look, but couldn't see her. I walked forward, but did not see her until she blinked. Then it became suddenly obvious that she could run me down. so I slowly backed up without unlocking eye contact. It was the first and last time I made that mistake in Africa. We had a great day's game spotting with loads of beautiful antelope to watch, along with any big cats that might be following. The middle of the day was too hot, however, for the cats, and the game were left to graze in freedom. Generally speaking, only the young and very old are most vulnerable and are culled from the herd most often. We then headed back to camp for tea and sunset. A huge number of elephants came down to the river each sunset for a bathe and turned on a hell of a show. Our campsite was perfectly elevated for viewing up the river with binoculars. The sight of at least 100 animals in the lenses was something no zoo or wildlife centre could have ever prepared us for. Slowly, as we got more used to being surrounded by wildlife, the adventure became more enjoyable. We clicked into a routine of getting up at dawn and driving around game spotting each day. We soon learned the best spots near our camp, and no 2 days were ever quite the same. On one hot afternoon, we were watching a huge bull elephant bulldoze down trees. He had a particularly massive set of tusks and made for some great photos. Suddenly Wayne decided he needed a good close-up and jumped out of the car and approached the huge beast. The elephant suddenly turned his attentions from the tree he was eating to Wayne. The bull stamped his foot and flared his great ears in warning, but Wayne remained oblivious, happily snapping off some great shots. The bull then trumpeted, stamped its huge foot, and it was all too late for Wayne as the bull began to charge. "I'm out of here," I shouted to Wayne, and turned away, planting boot as I went. Wayne made a sudden sprint for the car and managed to dive head first through the open passenger side window as I spun the wheel. As I roared off, my foot flat to the floor, all I could see was the huge elephant's head in the rear vision mirror. I could feel the ground shaking as he charged after us. Luckily, I had enough power to out-sprint the bull and slowly pull away from him with Wayne hanging halfway out the window, far too close for comfort. After that incident, we made sure not to push our luck too much, as these animals were truly wild and had little fear of man. At one point, the road was blocked by a troop of baboons, with one particularly belligerent male that parked himself in the middle. I got out to shoo him away, only to come darting back as he screamed and charged at me. We soon learned not to underestimate any of the wildlife about. Living conditions were the most basic at our makeshift camps. The river water was unusable because of bilharzia, a nasty waterborne parasite that destroys the liver and has no cure. We were also limited by our food stores, which were rationed carefully. Luckily enough, there were no more incidents at camp, so we were able to adapt to the routine of the river. Each morning our warthog neighbours would parade past at dawn as we made breakfast. We spent each day trying to spot new species as well as our favourites. The giraffes were always fun to watch, as they looked so awkward as they stooped, knock-kneed to drink. Although ungainly to look at, they made for great watching as they grazed high up in the trees. Pretty much every species had some impressive attribute, from the grace of the antelope to the stealth of their predators, to the massive horned water buffalo, the ugly-looking wildebeest, the beautiful zebra, and all the other grazers. The most impressive of all, however, were the massive elephants with these huge tusks and trunks. To my mind, at least, they were the kings of the jungle. Despite the hardships we had to endure, our time at Chobe was over all too soon. But I feel we left a little piece of ourselves there, and we took a little piece of that place with us. I look back on those days wistfully now, and I'm sure the 3 guys I travelled with feel the same. The end. Well, that's nearly my time for the day. I hope you enjoyed that story. I love reading those stories. They bring back such great memories. we did that trip when I was, I don't know, 21, 22, somewhere around there. It was a long, long time ago. I mean, we're going back nearly 35 years now, so it was a hell of a long time ago. Africa was a different place then, as were so many others, and we've seen a lot of things come and go in our time, and an enormous amount of change. The only constant is change, I guess, and, you know, I like the way we're going at the moment as a nation. I think things are going good. I don't agree with everything, but at least there are efforts being made to address things like mental health issues in this country. You know, some brave men like John Kirwan and Mike King and that have stepped forward, and that's good to see, and it's good to see the government pulling finger a bit. I don't know if they'll win the next election. In some ways I hope they do, because at least they're doing something. The likelihood is they won't keep all their promises. They'll run out of cash and they'll get the short, sharp shrift at least the next election after that. But while the going's good, you know, it's good to see that we're becoming a more tolerant society, that we're doing a little bit towards helping those less fortunate, and it's always very good to see that. And you know, Arrow Radio has done that for me and people like me, people who would not otherwise have a voice. And as you know, it's something totally different. It's not the sort of thing that you'll hear on the big radio stations. I mean, those people, yeah, I can't go on about it, but you know what I think. Anyway, that's nearly me, and I'm gone for the next 2 weeks. I'm up to Coromandel to go and slay some snaps, and I'm really looking forward to that. I hope I'll go up through the beautiful Hawke's Bay. I love that part of the country, and it's nice to have you good folks on board. And the Wairarapa, the beautiful Wairarapa, of course. I cruised up today, and that drought's not anywhere near as bad as what they're making out. There's a lot of green, a lot of farmers have got hay in, you know, and the rains aren't that far away. So, you know, the media does exaggerate a lot of stuff a lot of the time, and I think we're in for a pretty good year. I'm really going to enjoy my time. I'm going to miss doing this for a couple of weeks, but I'll be back. And, you know, my special thanks to the sponsors, to Wairarapa TV for putting this on the telly. There's the internet, of course. Encourage your friends. There's podcasts on all the great shows that are on radio. Special thanks to Veronica and to Michael, who do a wonderful job here for this not-for-profit organisation that I think is truly worthy of support. Thanks very much to all the sponsors for making a difference. New Zealand On Air and all the other sponsors who do such a great job supporting something different, something unique, and that is by ordinary people like myself, for ordinary people in the community. And at the end of the day, that's all we have is each other. So, you know, I hope you support the station, tell your friends about it, get into it, and it's something different, you know. So thanks very much for your support. I'm going to have a great holiday, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.